Welcome to Spirit Level, the podcast that explores spirit, mystery, inspiration, and the ancient arts of divination through the lens of modern living. I'm Fingal.
And I'm Jamie.
And we're your hosts. In this podcast, we have a mix of guest speakers asking what spirituality means to them, talking heads between Jamie and me, our experiences, what's helped us along our path and what could inspire you, and maybe some meditations along the way. Hi, Jamie.
We're back again.
Back again. I think I sang that last time, didn't I?
Yeah.
Probably.
Get a new tune.
Get a new joke, Fingal.
So what have we been doing? Are we going to share anything with the listeners? What's been going on?
Yeah. So we've just come back from our friend's wedding in Devon.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it was the biggest hippie fest, but in all the best possible ways. Very few shoes were worn, and there was lots of mantras being sung, and yes, it was gorgeous. I came back really just full. Actually.
Fingal is now adding to his CV because people keep saying, well, basically he keeps being asked to lead these wedding ceremonies. What do you call ordinate the wedding ceremonies? So one of our friends said, well, the thing is, you're the closest thing to a priest that I know. So it's funny. So he's got another 2 weddings coming up. So this is one of 3. So this is his second job, I think, that you're going to be doing for a while.
I know we spoke about this before, but it has been such an interesting shift of archetype. Like my archetype was very much kind of artist and creative, which still is very much me. But I feel that the way that I'm being perceived now is much more in this kind of spiritual archetype, and other people are starting to recognize that. And instead of coming to me saying, you know, weddings for me used to be, oh, would you make me a waistcoat, or would you make my jacket, or could you alter my dress, from my fashion background. But now it's, oh, can you ordinate? So it's been really interesting, that shift. And even we were at dinner last night, and this guy on the table opposite was like, Are you involved in spirituality at all? So
I mean, that thing you have around your neck is quite a giveaway, I suppose.
Well, the thing around my neck is this, for the benefit of the listeners, is a giant crystal that looks a little bit like an altar.
Yeah.
It is a slight giveaway, but I also like to feel like it's my emanating aura of wisdom and sagacity and.
Good. So we were at
Jamie's
a wedding.
Yet to be convinced.
And it's been a really fun weekend. And then we thought, on the way back, why not stop off and record a couple more episodes? What a treat for you all.
Yeah, also, sorry, just before we launch into today's episode, one thing that I saw the other day, and I tried it out, and the results were mind-blowing, was I saw on Instagram or Facebook or one or the other, this thing saying, universe, send me a gift within the next 24 hours. So you say the time out loud. You say, okay, it's 2:43 p.m. Universe, send me a gift within the next 24 hours. And I tried it, and it blooming worked. I can't reveal. Well, maybe I can reveal by the time. Oh, I don't know.
Don't say anything yet.
Can't say anything yet. But the gift that's come through is a whopper. It's absolutely amazing. So it's a collab that's coming up. Really, really exciting. But I just encourage all our listeners, watchers, just before we launch into today's thing, say, right, universe, it's X time, whatever time it is at the time you're listening. Send me a gift within the next 24 hours. You've got to do it with a sense of belief and gratitude, and then just let go and see what comes in.
Love that.
Yeah, and tell us what you get. And we're always fascinated to hear from the listeners, which segues me beautifully into, we've got our first piece of fan mail.
We have. We did say, didn't we? Get in touch and let us know what you want to hear on the podcast. And this email was so well written, so beautifully put, that we actually thought we're going to do this right here, right now.
Yeah, so this is what we're covering today. So this is from, I'm going to say V, because some people get a bit shy if they're announced, but it's V from Australia. So if you're listening, VB is not Victoria Beckham, sadly, but it's a VB, and she starts off saying, "I'm a fan of your podcast. It's got such lovely flow and lilt, and your chat is quite hypnotic," which I thought was rather lovely. But she asked a really, really interesting question, and she says, "Well, partly, is everybody psychic? If you feel as though you've got this kind of intuitive sense and psychic abilities, how do you test them and how do you trust them, if they even exist at all?" Because she goes on to talk a little bit about sometimes there can be real wishful thinking that plays a part of, that thing. It's really hard to distinguish between our intuition, our instincts, and wishful thinking. So I thought today maybe we explore a little bit of kind of because I guess there's this general misconception, isn't there, that you kind of wake up one day and you're like, I'm a psychic, which in some ways it kind of is that process. But also one thing that a lot of people perhaps don't know, actually there's quite a lot of training that goes into psychic abilities. So what I often say, and again, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself here, but it's a bit like a musician. There are those that are able to just pick up a musical instrument and seem to just play the scales innately. They don't need much training at all. And then there are those that can toil away for hours and hours and hours and practice and practice and practice and practice, and yet can still kind of almost struggle to play the scales. So psychism's kind of the same in a certain degree. So I think some people have a stronger innate ability and some people don't. But what I would say is we're all intuitive beings. So maybe today we can kind of unpick what's the difference between intuition and what's the difference between psychism. But could you perhaps share, Jamie, some things that have really helped you connect? Because I suppose because I've been slightly involved in this world slightly longer, perhaps some of that self-doubt. I think that doubt is always there, and I think that doubt is always healthy to kind of go, am I making this up? Is this accurate? Or have I got, because I think as soon as you kind of start going, oh, I'm perfect at this, I'm great, oh, I'm the chosen one, I'm the Messiah, then you're getting into kind of hot water, really. So I think that level of, is this wishful thinking, is this doubt, never really fully goes away, but I think that's important. But I suppose with you, it's maybe perhaps taken you slightly longer to kind of fully embrace that psychic part of you, if I'm not putting words in your mouth. Yeah,
I think it is definitely a slow process. It's such a huge thing that, we still don't really know, if we're completely honest, we don't know what happens when we pass. We don't know what it's going to be like, right? So yes, we trust that this process is working, and we gain more trust because of the experience that happens and what it gives us. Our connection that we have, and when we feel that strong presence and that strong connection, you kind of know there's more to things than what we can just see.
And when you say strong connection to what?
To a higher power, another source, a bigger energy, a source, God, whatever you want to call it. So it's a funny one, but I feel like it does take time to trust that process.
Yeah.
And that only comes from the practice of doing the work more and more. And it's hard, isn't it? Because we get told not to get caught up in the outcomes of a session as a psychic, because it's not our job to kind of give the answers or fix the person. It's our job to deliver messages that are coming through from spirit. And we just have to trust that those messages are coming through.
Yeah, we just have to be a complete channel.
A channel.
Because as soon as we try to figure out where's this going, does this make sense for them, we get in the way.
Exactly. And then that's when it all goes wrong, isn't it? That's when everything. That's when you know, and you feel it. You feel it when you start shifting into that space, because you sound more like a coach or rather than a channel. And I think that's the big difference. And it's particularly different. I found that particularly...
not to say that you can't do both within a sitting, because I do.
Exactly.
It's just really important that you're explicit in terms of this is coming from spirit.
Exactly. And I was about to say, the thing we both coach, I was coaching before I was even doing the psychic work. So my archetype is very much, I am a teacher archetype. I am a coach archetype. I like helping people along on their journey. So you're right. You have to distinguish, and the best way to do that is to say, "Oh, this is slightly coming from me rather than spirit, but X, Y, and Z." As long as you're clear on what the boundaries are, I think it's fine to mix it in a little bit. But predominantly, I suppose, you want to have the session that is led, and when it's the other reason when it's being led from spirit. I find, or even in my coaching sessions when I'm with clients, it's when I'm not even thinking about what's being said. There's no preempting, oh, I'm going to say this, or we're going to talk about this topic now. It just comes, and it feels like it comes from above, and it flows through you, and it just feels aligned. And often I get goosebumps as well. That's the other thing, when you can't start to get that tingling sensation on the back of your neck.
This is a great, because I was literally thinking as you were speaking there, could we give perhaps the listeners and viewers some practical kind of tips on how to kind of start working with this? And we'll hopefully we'll give more. But that is a really good one, is ask for your tell.
Yeah.
So for me, I get this kind of tingling or expansive feeling behind my right ear. It's really weird, but that's how I know that I'm tuned in.
Yeah.
So anytime that you're trying to work with particularly spirit or this kind of psychic aspect of yourself, just ask for a particular tell. And that should always be consistent and the same. And that's just that's your little tap on the shoulder, so to speak, of right, okay, you're really in the zone. And further to what you were saying about this, when we really are in flow, and we've spoken about being in flow before and truly channeling these messages and not overanalyzing them, two things happen. One is half the time in my readings, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but that's usually a really good sign. Also in my readings, I know I'm really connected to spirit when I pun. If I'm telling loads of puns, it's this weird thing of I know it's not coming from me. It must be one of my guides that's really into puns. I've actually just figured out who that is, but we're going to talk about guides in another episode. But, and also the other thing I want to say is that when we get to the end of the reading, you'll remember almost nothing of what you've said. Because it's so from a different part of your mind, so this is why I find it really difficult in my readings where somebody says, oh, can you explain the mechanics of how this works? I say, I'm more than happy to, but I'm going to leave that to the end, because as soon as I have to start working from my rational memory brain, it's a very, very different part of my brain that I'm using for the intuitive work and that kind of channeling work. Sorry, quick aside, we've just been asked by a university actually to go and do some brain tests. They want to do some ECG tests on psychics. Yeah, so we'll have to let you know.
Oh, wow.
So there's lots more people kind of curious about this stuff. But yeah, it's often that thing where, I'll have a client come to me 6 months later. I recognize their name, but I will remember absolutely zilch of what I've said in my session. And that's usually a really, really good sign, because again, it's proof that it's not coming from you. So were there some really kind of practical ways or some really helpful ways for you? Because I know this is something that you're still perhaps battling with a little, distinguishing between that perhaps coaching side and that spirit-led side or that kind of psychic side. How have you managed to kind of distinguish perhaps those two parts? I
think for me, and this came up recently because I had a reading with somebody that I just knew wasn't quite as on point as it could have been. And you'd mentioned before about what were you doing before, and how long are you taking to...
So just to clarify, you were giving a reading.
I was giving a reading.
It wasn't as sharp.
Yeah, it wasn't as sharp as potentially I'd have thought. And after unpicking it, we realised that the preparation hadn't been quite as sharp. So I think the difference with coaching is you can very much go into a coaching session and deliver the session. There might be a bit of practical prep that you do before, but you generally don't worry. You just go in and it's fine. Although I say that. That's actually adjusted how I do my coaching sessions now because of this work, because I think it's always a good practice to come from a place of stillness and quiet and presence.
Absolutely.
If you're doing something that's of importance. So actually it's not entirely true, because I will prep for my coaching sessions like this now as well. But it's that moment of meditation. It's that moment of stillness. And actually it's extending that period. So perhaps when you've been doing it as long as you have, that period can get slightly shorter because it's like you're tapping in and you can do it quicker. But for me, because I'm still relatively new at this side, I realized I need to spend more time meditating, grounding, and then opening up through my channels. So I hadn't had time that particular day. And I think that played into that part where, not necessarily the information wasn't there and wasn't as good. I just didn't feel
you weren't as settled
in it.
Centered.
Whereas when I'm present and I've done all of that work beforehand, and because and I felt it today, that very strong feeling of being grounded, and I thought, here we go, now my feet are glued, now they're down, and I'd stopped kind of thinking, the mind thinking, and I was just very much in my body.
Thank you for pointing that out, because it's so true, because we've covered obviously grounding and protection. And if somebody says to me, right, how do I start connecting with my intuition, where do I start first? Usually it's 2 points. One is grounding. Just go, if you haven't listened to that episode on grounding, go and listen to it. That is by far the first place to start. Because you're completely right. It's like people don't often see those 15 minutes we spent previous to somebody coming in of really settling our energy, opening ourselves up, getting in that. That's not to say you can't have intuitive hits outside of that, but it's much more sustained, it's much more accurate, it's much more controlled if you found that stillness beforehand. And
I wanted to ask you this. I don't know whether you work like this, but I recently as well. So you ask for your guides to come through, your loved ones, whoever it is that's your spirit team, your helpers. You have a gatekeeper. Usually most people have a gatekeeper, which we can talk a bit more about. Depends. The team is different for everybody. I feel like my guides are very much my ancestors, my family, my dad, particularly my auntie, and there's a few others. But so you can also ask for their protection in the sitting in terms of the client that comes, because you can get challenging clients that come, and perhaps you aren't feeling great that day. I remember I reading last week, I had a banging headache, and I just said, please send somebody that's going to trust this work and believe in this work because the last thing you want is somebody that's sitting there with their arms crossed, which straight away just gives you that energy that's like, I'm not into this, or that energy of go on then, impress me, which is it's hard because we are dealing with something that is still unknown. This is not a particular science.
Well, I always say to that, it's like, imagine if somebody did that at a party. You go and chat to somebody and they've got their arms crossed and they give you one-word answers. It's like, you're not going to vibe. There's no exchange.
And there has to be an exchange.
Somebody has to tell all the details. I'm perfectly happy for people to go, But I think you raise such an important point there, of going back to VB's question of how do I start developing these abilities, or how do I distinguish, and we'll talk more about how to distinguish between intuition and wishful thinking. But it's asking.
Yes.
We're so caught up in this doing mentality of like, it's got to be effort. I've got to push my way through this. I've got to do this. It's all coming from me. And this is something I'm still really reconciling within myself. I remember having one of my first readings. I was receiving a reading, not giving it. And the psychic saying to me, you've got to remember not to feel as though you've got to do this all on your own. Because I'm very kind of self-efficient and I try to do everything by myself to a fault. And actually, as part of remembering that this kind of psychism and this intuitive stuff, it isn't, so intuition comes from, I think I may have mentioned this before, the Latin word intuare, which is to look upon, and you've literally got your tuition that comes from within. So that is a kind of self-autonomy thing. But 9 times out of 10, you just need to ask. Ask the universe, ask God, ask Allah, ask whomever you see as a higher power, assist me within this. And this is the second part. So the grounding is first. And the second part of how I say to people, develop your psychic sense or your intuitive sense, is just to ask. Just as we open today's session with, right, universe, send me a gift within the next 24 hours. And that's not about avarice. That's not about greed. That is developing faith and trust and that communication. So many times we've been in readings, right? And we get something wrong, or we don't understand something. And our mentor, our tutor would say to us afterwards, well, did you ask? And we're like, oh, I forgot. You forgot to go to your guides going, what does that mean? What does that, why are they here?
And I'm still definitely, that is still something I'm having to practice and do. But it's also because when I'm in the flow, I don't tend to have to ask because it just all comes and it's very quick.
Yeah.
But on the occasions where I'm not quite in the flow and I'm having pauses, and the pauses are difficult in reading is because as soon as you pause, your energy drops. Yeah. And when your energy drops.
Well, for some people, they love long pauses.
Right.
I've been to readers that really like those long meditative pauses, and then they give you almost a sentence, but it's so precise.
Right. No, not
but
for
I
me.
think for you and I definitely
I need to just keep talking, and that's how it works. That's how it goes. It just flows. But the thing I wanted to mention is what I've started doing recently before my sessions as well is tuning into that name. So before they arrive, I start saying their name and I start asking for any tips or any things.
Smart.
But I wondered, is that what you do? Or I suppose my concern is without them being there in front of me, am I definitely tuning into them, or am I bringing some more of myself through? And I just wondered.
Great question. It's funny you say this, actually, because I was in a reading not too long ago and I gave them a name and they said, oh, I can't take it. And so it's weird because this woman, she keeps coming in a wedding dress. I keep seeing her in a wedding dress and this is her name. And the woman was a bit confused. I said, oh, fine, let's just move on. Then my next client came in, and this sounds like the most obvious thing, but her name was the name that I kept getting, and she was just about to get married.
Right.
And it was weird. It was almost like I was reading ahead. It was the strange thing. It's never happened before, and that's probably on me for not having very crisp, clear, sharp boundaries. But I feel that, you know, in this space that we're recording from at the moment is our studio. And normally we have to go and collect people from the main waiting room and bring them through. And I like that because I get to cheat a little bit. So I start kind of tuning into their energy, just so I kind of go, where am I going to start this reading? So I've got that kind of minute or so to kind of figure out. So absolutely, no, that's the right thing to do completely. One task that we were sometimes set in when we was first training is actually look at to think of a celebrity that you don't know much about and just tune into their name and tune into their energy and see what you can get, and then research it afterwards, so you can see how much you kind of get aligned there. Particularly when I was teaching or am teaching psychic mentorship, what I will do is say to a friend, right, can I just have your birthday? Are you okay for someone to tune in to your energy? 9 times out of 10, my friends go, yes. And I say, okay. And then to my student, I say, right, this is the birth date. What can you tell me about this person? They've just got to tune in psychically like that. So there's some little tasks that you can do with that. This does lead me to this thing, though, where people say, when we meet them at the party, I don't know if you've had this yet, and they're like, are you picking up anything on me? Or what colour's my aura? And the thing I always say is, well, I'm off the clock, so to speak, because if I was kind of fully open in this party environment, it would just all be so overwhelming. So that's part of it. But also, you haven't given me permission. I'm not rifling through people's energetic drawers as part of that.
And that's like when somebody asks you in a reading, oh, so could you tell me a little bit about my boyfriend as well while we're here? What do you think he thinks of that? And I always feel that's a bit of a weird ground to be on.
Completely.
And, you know, I can talk about it from the client's perspective and how that might be having. But as soon as they say, dig into my partner, it feels a bit wrong to do that. And I kind of always just say, well, look, it's not really my place to go digging into his world without his consent, but from your perspective, I would perhaps suggest X, Y, and Z.
Exactly that. It's like, it's that, by you coming to a reading with me, that is kind of giving
consent,
exactly. So you're giving me a certain permission, and we'll do that respectfully and all of that stuff.
Looking to deepen your spiritual practice and holistic well-being? Then we have the answer. Here at the Wellness Foundry, we run spiritual retreats throughout the year in both the UK and abroad with an emphasis on luxury, community, and spirituality. Expect a soul-enriching blend of yoga, profound intuitive teachings, delicious food, all within an idyllic setting. Use code podcast5 at checkout and enjoy 5% off your booking. For more information and bookings, visit the website wellnessfoundry.co.uk/retreats or find out more on our Instagram @wellnessfoundry. Terms and conditions apply.
One thing I wanted to come back to, and again, this is something that often people are quite surprised about, and I notice this a lot. A lot of people ask this question of me of how long you've been reading for, or how long you've been doing the tarot for. And I think often people are quite surprised at how long we train for. So I trained in psychic studies for, I think, if my memory serves me correct, about 6 years. I think it might have been slightly shy of 6 years, but I probably did about 10 terms worth. They do it on the kind of school system. And I think, if I remember correctly, you maybe have done 4 or something like that. So it's many, many, many hours, like many, many hours. And I remember our mentor kind of saying, actually, the thing is, you're kind of here because you're psychic. You've got the goods. We don't need to kind of put that into question. It's more about how the kind of ethical side of it, or how to hold space properly, or how to deliver difficult messages, or how to be consistent, or how to, you were saying before, of those challenging clients, how to deal with those kind of situations. So there's the kind of practical aspect. So I would say to anybody that is curious, just Google it or look up, or there's usually spiritualist church or development groups, and they are everywhere. In all towns, all cities, you will find a development group to go with. And it is about being in that community. Just as a kind of little aside to that, not all development groups fit everybody's types of personalities. So if you go and it doesn't quite fit, don't just think, oh, this isn't for me entirely. Carry on looking around. We run intuitive development groups through the Wellness Foundry as well, but do it in tandem with other people. Do it in a group setting. That's so important, because again, that will allay any frustrations or worries or concerns, and being able to kind of hear other people ask those questions and go, yeah, that really rings true of my experiences, or, oh, I didn't even know I needed to ask that question. It's really important. But please understand that this isn't a quick fix thing. Like, the more, it's interesting actually, because I was thinking, I'd quite like to go back to training in some sort of way. So that never really stops. And as part of that as well, is that it's, and I think I've mentioned this loads of times before, is psychic development and self-development go hand in glove. So all through that process, you're having to work through your own stuff as well, and your own shadow side, or the unresolved parts of you, or those kind of, and again, because when you're training, you're getting little mini readings week in, week out. And most of the time, you're just hearing the same message of you're not grounded enough, or you need to move home, or you're not being creative enough, or whatever it is, these little adjustments. And it kind of forces you to kind of do that slight self-inspection. So it is a training process. And a lot of the charlatans, because there are charlatans in this space, but that's not exclusive to the psychic and spiritual worlds. There are charlatans in every industry, but there are people. That's often just because they've picked up a tarot deck, done a week's worth of course, and then thought, right, I'm a tarot reader. And it's not to say that, you can't. I always encourage people, pick up the deck, start experimenting, start changing. I'm not saying that you have to be a kind of master before you charge. Quite the opposite. I think far too many people wait far too long until they start charging. But you have to do the training as well.
And it's hard, isn't it? Because it's not like with psychotherapy where there's a governing body. We don't have that governing body. But at the same time, being at this wedding at the weekend, we were with lots of psychotherapists, which was just fascinating, because people are just much more interested in having interesting worthy conversations. There wasn't so much fluff and bullshit. It was a bit more about, like, you was chatting to this guy, wasn't you? It was like, who was presented himself in a way that was, I'm working in banking, investment banking, or whatever, that finance banking kind of role. Almost quite
you
embarrassed.
can imagine a hippie wedding.
A hippie wedding. It was like, don't mention it. And you ended up giving him a bit of coaching and helping him find his life purpose and talking about, and it's like, there were so many of those deep conversations that were going on. But what I realized is, yes, there is this governing body around psychotherapy and they have to go through the 5 years training, but actually it was so similar. The way we were having these conversations with people, there was not really that much difference. It's a bit like a religion, right? We come from it from different angles, but the end goal generally is the same. And it felt so alike. And I had this real moment of, I am doing it right. This is right. If it's being stamped off by somebody that's in a 5-6 year psychotherapy course, and we are having these conversations that are similar thoughts, similar beliefs, and we are going through that training process still. It's just there isn't a sealed stamp that says, now you're a psychic.
Yeah. And this is, as psychics, we have to legally classify it as entertainment, I think. And there are certain, we're not going to name any names, but it's not a triangle, it's not a circle, but it's a fill in the blank, people. But they cut off our banking system because we were doing psychic readings and...
It wasn't recognised as something. It wasn't
in alignment with their core values.
They basically,
they made me feel like I was running, I don't know, some kind of crackdown or something. It was very, very odd, that whole kind of conversation. But this is the issue. This, until it is recognised as a legitimate thing, and then it can be governed, then there can be a kind of awarding body, or there can be a certain kind of standard.
And we have talked about this, haven't we? About setting up a regular meetup for psychics and tarot readers and mediums in the industry, where you can come, and a bit like a therapist has to go to supervision. We were thinking, actually, this would be a great thing to do as well.
Me and the team, the amount of times we call each other up and say, I've had this one client, or I had this situation, or, are you feeling a bit weird at the moment? The energy's really off. The amount of times we just check in and reassure each other as like, everybody's really spinny, or everybody is feeling really lethargic or heavy, and all of that stuff.
You just need to, we don't have that ability, that time to share those experiences. And it's so important for our learning, for each other's learning, and for our processing of what's gone on, because sometimes you can come out of a session like a psychotherapy session and you've covered really heavy topics, and it's been a lot, and we're all empaths, we're all very open, and we take these things on. Of course, we have spiritual hygiene, so we're able to kind of let them go, but
nice plug.
Not, we are to a degree taking things on. So if anybody is out there and is working in this industry and is interested in this idea of a kind of
a
meetup or a check-in or a supervision of it, whatever, do drop us a message and get in touch, because we'd be really interested in hearing from you, and potentially something that we'd like to offer. So
definitely. So I wanted to just go back to a moment to Virginia's question. And she was saying, because this is a question I get asked a lot, and it's around this thing of, well, how do you connect with your intuition? How do you know it's your intuition talking and not wishful thinking? And how do you kind of keep developing that kind of particular sense? So if you're all right, I'll give my 2 cents and then I'll kind of pass over. The difference between intuition and wishful thinking, and I spoke about this recently, and I got quite a bit of kickback, actually, interestingly enough. I don't tend to get much kickback from what I was saying. But I was saying wishful thinking, our intuition tends to be about something that makes us uncomfortable. So that could be, I'm walking into this room and there's a bit of a odd vibe, or I'm making a decision that my intuition is telling me, are you sure you want to do that? That doesn't feel quite right. Or it might be just kind of little nudges to a particular direction. Whereas wishful thinking will be much more about our kind of storytelling aspect. It will be more about what we want rather than what we need. And just to clarify, intuition is always coming from a place of the vibration of love. So it's self-preservation, basically. Whereas wishful thinking tends to come more from a place of fear. You know, there is this great, I am so sorry, I should know his name, but there is this great spiritual teacher that his part of his whole philosophy is all decisions can be based on either love or fear. If you boil down anything that you say or any choices you make or anything that you kind of, any actions that you take within life, if you really go to the core, they'll either be based on fear and love. And intuition is always love, and wishful thinking is always about fear. It's like this storytelling aspect of, oh, it's going to come like this because I want it like this and X, Y, Z. So that's kind of the difference between intuition and wishful thinking. The other thing that I kind of say as well is that wonderful line from Harry Potter where Dumbledore and Harry are they're in King's Cross, St. Pancras. This right at I think it's the last book. Sorry for any spoiler alerts. But it's when they're in the White at King's Cross. And Harry Potter says to Dumbledore, Professor, is this really happening or is it all in my head? And Dumbledore said, of course it's all in your head, Harry. But does that mean it's not happening? And I think that's such amazing that's such a wonderful, wonderful summation of this work. It's like, actually, does it really matter where it's coming from? You know, this is what makes me really frustrated when people boo-boo this work, because it's like, no, they were my experiences. And no one can deny my experiences. They were my experiences of how I was kind of interacting with the world. And so, you know, again, going back to this thing about intuition, the way that you really connect with that is through stillness and groundedness, as we've spoken about before. Continually ask, because again, we keep forgetting to ask and just spending a moment saying, just that little beat. Even simple things like we've spoken about before, when you go to choose an apple in the supermarket and you just go, which one's correct for me, or which one's going to be the most nutritious for me? And you'll be really surprised at the results of some of that. Or, you know, go and take yourself for a walk, but don't use a map. We did this, didn't we? And in Bath, when we stopped off in Bath and you were talking about this particular shop that you'd read about. And I had no idea what you were talking about. And I took you down this really kind of little alley and we were like, Fingal, where are you taking me? This is it's filled with rubbish and most of Bath is absolutely gorgeous. So it was a bit of a dodgy. But then at the end of this alley was this shop that you've been speaking about. So it's just, and this other time we got lost on the motorway and I said, oh, just follow that van. It's got FG, which are my initials on the back of the number plate. And we did, and it led us back on to the right course. So it's just have fun with it as well. Just allow these things to drop in and just keep asking them. And the most important thing is whatever your intuition is giving you, act upon it. Don't just allow it to be this kind of perpetual kind of percolation of an idea, because effectively, if you don't act upon it, however uncomfortable that may make you feel, however silly you might have to look, like suddenly you have to get up. You know, the amount of times we sat in a restaurant and said, can we swap seats? And you're like, kind of slightly rolling your eyes. You think, but that's what my intuition is telling me, is you're not comfortable in this place. So it can sometimes socially make us look a bit silly or be a bit awkward. But if that's what your intuition is telling you, then do it. Don't just kind of sit there and suffer, because even at the times that you later look back and go, oh, I was wrong, that was wishful thinking, at least you have evidence of more of that kind of differing of opinions. But I think that's kind of everything that I would say on kind of around intuition. So it's part of like community, stillness, and asking.
And awareness.
Yeah.
Like, isn't it? I think because you've got to start to become aware when you're having intuitive hits. Like you said, acting upon them is one thing, but if you're letting them go without noticing them, you're going to miss them anyway. So it's, how do we cultivate more awareness? And I suppose that is through the stillness, and that is through the being present. It's about being in the moment and ultimately just not constantly thinking ahead, procrastinating or worrying.
Yes. The other thing that VB was asking is, she feels as though she's right on the cusp of her psychic awakening and her spiritual awakening. So I'm wondering if there's any advice that you would like to impart as somebody that has really just gone through that process over the last 4 years. What were your what helped you on that particular journey?
I suppose getting your tribe is important.
Yes.
Again, you've talked about community, surrounding yourself with lovers, not haters, because that, you know, and it's why, to be honest, it's funny we're talking about this so openly now, because there are still so many people in quite my close group of friends that I haven't really told that I'm doing this. And it's because they are not quite at that same place as I am at the moment. So there's kind of just no point. There's no point.
I disagree with that.
Do you?
Yeah.
I think it will come in time. Maybe that's because you're further along the journey. For me, to preserve, because I'm still so on the fence of is this right for me? Is this what I'm meant to be doing? I'm still in the process of trusting this process.
That makes sense.
That it's like you don't want to have any things that are going to come in that are going to challenge that at the moment, because it's taking you away from that focus. So I think until you are completely solid in that belief system, I think surrounding yourself with the lovers, not the haters, is a really, and you know, and I say that I am talking, it's not that nobody knows what I'm doing, but it's only recently that I've started to expand a little bit more and be a little bit more open about it.
And that's true. Like when we were speaking, I think on our first episode or before, but about when I used to meet people, it was like, oh, I'm a yoga teacher. Oh, I run the Wellness Foundry. Oh, I'm a tarot reader. Oh, I'm a psychic. And now I just meet people and I'm just like, I'm a tarot reader psychic. So there is a kind of ownership.
And it's interesting. And I say when people ask us, oh, we run a business and we have a team of psychics, healers. So I am still not quite putting myself into that position. I'm very much in the archetype of a business because I've always been entrepreneurial. I've always had entrepreneurial kind of
and actually
ideas.
That spiritual coming out is really difficult for people. It's really, really, I do understand. Again, this is something I get asked time and time again. Part of the reason why I was saying, I slightly disagree, but actually the way that you explained it is completely correct. It is a bit of a kind of when that plant is a fledgling, a sapling, for instance, if anything is heavy-handed on that, it might kind of crush it and you get a bit thrown
You've got to
off.
be confident with it yourself before you come out.
So that does make complete sense. But part of why I wanted to do this podcast and set up the Wellness Foundry is to make it, and it thankfully is coming out more and more and more as a kind of collective conversation. And it's so interesting that since I've entered in this world, so many of my other friends have started the training. They're really kind of curious about it. Almost every time I go to a dinner party and this kind of conversation comes up, everybody's discussing these weird experiences they've had, whether they're kind of really entrenched in this world or not. So it's kind of the more of us are able to come out and stand proud. Because for me, I think I mentioned before, coming out as a spiritualist was in some ways harder than coming out as gay, really. It's a funny thing, isn't it? It's like,
I would definitely say that it's harder to come out as a spiritualist than as a
It's so strange, that, isn't it? But I think that tide is turning. But you're completely right. That's why when we're training with the tarot or training with psychism, don't bother practicing on. Don't try and practice on people where you're trying to change their values and their
beliefs.
Views.
Yes,
it's just like
it's just too much work. It's too much energy, and it's not a good use of your time if you're trying to establish what you believe and where you sit into this world. So I would say get your tribe, get your positive people around that you can interact with. And then the second thing to work on is to trust yourself and to trust the intuition and to trust the process. That's the biggest thing for me. Imposter syndrome in this work is the killer. And it's something that, because as somebody that's seen psychics since I was very young, since 16, I've always had this idea that a psychic is somehow not of this world. Yeah. So they're put onto a pedestal, a huge pedestal. And I've had to break down all of that stuff, that actually we all do have this psychic ability, if honed, if trained, X, Y, and Z. it is about trusting the process. And that, again, just comes through practice.
So just finally, as we kind of wrap up before I pull a card, VB was also talking about, thank you so much, by the way, V, for sending all of this through. It's so lovely to know what to talk about and what's actually helpful to people. So I really reiterate, please send in suggestions of stuff that you want us to cover. It's kind of super, super helpful for us and inspiring. She was also talking about kind of seeing almost shadows in her room, or kind of these extrasensory perceptions that aren't always comfortable. Again, this is something super, super common, so common, and it's often what people puts people off.
Yeah.
And one thing that happens a lot with people that I've met in psychic development is that when they were young, they were highly intuitive and highly psychic, and they would kind of have these experiences, and they were so scared of them because they didn't know how to control them. So again, this is where the training comes in. And really, I would really urge each and every one of you that is kind of curious about this, seek out somebody that is further along the path than you are, to guide you, to assist, whether that's on one-to-one, whether that's in a group situation, whatever. But just do not attempt to do this on your own. Because there is this big thing, particularly at the moment, about self-autonomy in our society, and no one's going to tell me what to do, and this kind of hierarchical system and all of that, and I get that. And there is value in determining the self, absolutely. And, it shouldn't be a dogmatic approach that people just tell you how to do and what to do. Any good mentor will cultivate and develop what's needed for you as an individual. But please, please, please don't try and do any of this by yourself. And anybody that's had those kind of unnerving experiences, the wonderful thing is, as soon as you start the training, then you are in command of it. It is not in command of you. And what often happens is, because people feel it's controlling them, they have no choice but to shut it down in its entirety. And it's such a shame, because it really is a gift. It really is such a wonderful, wonderful. It's almost like seeing in ultraviolet. It's like seeing something that perhaps other people will miss, or seeing it's not even about a comparison thing. It's just about seeing the world in a kind of richer, more technicolor kind of way, I would say.
It just helps diminish your ego. It's that thing that we're all trying to do. We are trying to figure out when our ego is making decisions and when it's coming from a place of, the soul or authenticity or light or whatever, however you want to distinguish it. And I had a client just now today who talked about serving. And it's that thing that, I believe that we are put on this earth to serve others. We are put here to be of assistance.
Yes.
And what better way to be of an assistance is if you can actually shed some light on a struggle that somebody's having, and they have an aha moment where they go, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And in that moment, you've unlocked something for them.
Well, this is why I set up the Wellness Foundry.
Yeah.
For that very reason, is I didn't want people to go through that experience of, for me, it took 2 years of kind of going, what the fuck? Of just being completely lost. And this is, for that very reason, is to help support other people within that process. And it's such an honor to do so.
So he's got some tarot cards in his hands for those of you that aren't watching on YouTube. So as always, as customary, we take a card at the end of each session, and it's a card for the collective.
So the card that we have today is the Knight of Wands. I love the Knight of Wands. Such a fiery energy. You can see that the protagonist is riding a horse of red and has this plume that looks like fire and has this desert landscape behind him. I'm using the Rider-Waite deck here. And the Knight of Wands is about all of our passions in action. It's like the motivation, the drive, the excitement, the vitality in order to kind of move us forward, really. sometimes the shadow aspect of the Knight of Wands can be bravado or acting without thinking and impetuousness or arrogance or anything like that. But for me today, it's much more about that kind of lighter side, that much more kind of adventurous and excitable energy. So for me, this card is a reminder to us as a collective of what are you passionate about? What puts a fire in your belly? What do you feel a kind of creative impulse or a creative urge about? Today we've really been talking about this kind of psychic aspect, and that's not going to relate to anybody, but a lot of what we've spoken about, tribe, stillness, focus, training, mentorship, that can apply to any of our passions. So it's just taking a moment. I would really encourage you, at the end of this podcast, pull out a piece of paper, pull out your notebook, and just write everything that you're really passionate about in the world, in your local vicinity, even hobbies, anything like that, and really have an honest examination of, am I doing these? Am I donating enough time? Am I committing enough time to some of these passions that are really within me? And if the answer is no, then look at actually where are you perhaps wasting time? Where could you perhaps pull back so you can allow some of these passions to come through?
That was a particularly good one, wasn't it? Well done.
Thank you.
I haven't got
particularly good one because all the rest are crap.
I haven't even got anything to add to that. Apart from looking at it, I do get this as well, and I'm talking about a lot in my readings at the minute, is about people needing to have more fun.
Yes.
Like, it's just like we get so serious in life, and we've been reminded about this weekend because we've had a really fun 5 days or so, and we've connected on such, the best way to connect with somebody is by doing something that brings joy, by having fun. It's where we can find that deepness. And we, like all people, get caught up in work. What we do is still work. We love it, but it's a process. We have to do this. We have to answer emails, and it's a job. But making sure you allow time for that fun, and that's where you're going to get these connections with people and these deeper connections with people. We went bowling, didn't we? It's like
it was so great.
We went bowling, and it was just, and then played pool, and it was just, and everything that we were talking about, letting your intuition guide you. We were just being led by the universe. And for me, what did we decide I was?
You're a spontaneous planner.
Yes, that's it. No, I'm a spontaneous planner.
Something to that degree.
Yeah.
We can be spontaneous as long as it's planned.
Yeah, I can be spontaneous as long as it's planned. Mm-hmm. But we didn't do that. And it just led us on this amazing journey. So have more fun.
Love that. And that's the end of this week's episode. We'd love to hear what you think or suggestions on what you would like us to cover for the future. Either leave us a comment if the platform you're listening to allows it, or drop us an email, hello@wellnessfoundry.co.uk, or a DM on Instagram. Be sure to hit subscribe or follow to stay up to date with the latest releases. But until next time, love and blessings.